Back at 2019, from the local crime stories that captured the attention of people across the city to a divisive campaign for mayor. Plus, a look at some of the weirdest news stories we've covered this year. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of KSAT News at 9, streaming from right here in the KSAT 12 newsroom. I'm Myra Arthur. Tonight we are taking a look back at 2019, from the controversial to the bizarre to the just plain memorable. And we start here. 2019 seemed to be a year marked by decisions made by some local government entities that some people just didn't like. That may not come as a surprise, but these people didn't like them enough to sue. Some of those issues will likely carry over into the new year, and we'll keep an eye on what happens. But here's a look at some of the big topics that will likely play out in court in 2020. It was the controversy that turned political in a fast food minute. In March, the San Antonio City Council voted not to allow Chick-fil-A at San Antonio International Airport. Some council members said the move was in support of equality because of Chick-fil-A's anti-LGBTQ views. Mayor Ron Nirenberg touted it as a business decision since Chick-fil-A isn't open on Sundays, one of the busiest travel days of the week. Some conservative and faith-based groups slammed the council's vote. The city was eventually sued over it. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into whether there was any religious discrimination in the council's decision, and the Texas Attorney General's office launched its own probe. Then in July, Governor Greg Abbott signed the so-called Save Chick-fil-A bill into law statewide. It prevents local governments from retaliating against a person or a business for their membership or donations to religious organizations, and was inspired by the controversy right here in the Alamo City. Another contested decision from the San Antonio City Council: paid sick leave. The council actually voted last year to approve requiring businesses to provide paid sick leave to employees, but the fight both for it and against it spread throughout this year. Business groups filed a lawsuit to stop the ordinance, which delayed it from being implemented. The city then decreased the number of paid sick hours that some businesses had to provide and said the time could also be used in cases of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. They also started calling it sick and safe leave. It was supposed to then go into effect December 1st, but in late November, it was blocked yet again, this time by a state judge. We'll see what happens in 2020. This was the moment caught on camera that a new year won't soon erase for people living along several local lakes. The partial collapse of a dam on Lake Dunlap led to the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority making the decision to drain 4 area lakes: Lake McQueenie, Lake Placid, Meadow Lake, and Lake Gonzales, all along the Guadalupe River. The GBRA said the dams on those lakes may be in danger of failing too, and there isn't money to fix them. The decision could dry up the livelihoods and property values of people who work and live on those lakes. Their outcry was quick. 2 groups of property owners sued the GBRA to keep the water where it is. Then in September, both sides agreed to a temporary injunction to stop the draining of the lakes, pending a trial set for October of 2020. We have covered a lot of big crime stories over the past year. Some of them remain unsolved tonight. Here's a look back at the top 5.
It was a tragic start to 2019.
I think when you have any kind of child case involving harm to a child, it captures all of San Antonio's hearts.
Baby King J. Davila's body was discovered on January 11th. The 8-month-old was reported missing by his father on January 4th, but police say it was a staged kidnapping. Baby King was already dead. His father, Christopher Davila, accused of burying his son in a field after the baby allegedly fell and hit his head. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide by blunt force injuries. King's grandmother and another relative were also arrested in connection with his death. Davila remains in jail and is expected to go on trial in February. Around the same time, a mother and her 2 daughters were found shot to death in their home in Inaco Springs Ranch. The bodies of 37-year-old Nicole Olson, 16-year-old Alexa Montez, and 10-year-old London Bribiescas were found on January 10th. The medical examiner ruled the mother's death a homicide, her daughters homicides. But the Bexar County Sheriff's Office still hasn't closed the investigation, despite the medical examiner's ruling.
We have to continue to investigate, and in some instances, our investigation may concur with the medical examiners, or we may find something through the course of our investigation that may change that finding altogether.
About 2 months later, the Bexar County Sheriff would take on another big investigation, the disappearance of Andreen McDonald. The 29-year-old mother of one was reported missing on March 1st. Her remains were found months later in July on private property off Specht Road. Investigators said her bones were set on fire.
She was a strong, successful, beautiful woman, and we just all have to remember her for the good parts of her life.
Andreen's husband, Andre, is charged with murder and tampering with evidence. He allegedly bought gasoline, a hatchet, heavy-duty trash bags, gloves, and shovel. A search warrant also discovered a claw hammer and Andreen's blood on it. Andre remains in jail as he awaits his trial, which is currently set for February. On April 9th, San Antonio police discovered a gruesome scene on Stagecoach Lane. 53-year-old Mary Dempsey had been beaten with a baseball bat before her throat was cut. Police say her son, Matthew Dempsey, and Daniel Salcedo went to her home to rob her. When she returned home, the duo attacked and killed her. The 18-year-old pled guilty to murder as part of a plea deal. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison. Salcedo was also sentenced to 42 years for murder. On July 7th, Seguin police found human remains at a home while investigating a child abuse case. The body would later be identified as 71-year-old Jacqueline Creighton. Her daughter, Delissa Creighton, was charged with injury to a child under the age of 15 and 2 counts of causing serious bodily injury to an elderly person. Investigators believe Jacqueline suffered a non-life-threatening fall in 2016, and they said Delissa forced her own daughter to live with the decomposing body.
If you feel like police officers and deputies made headlines this year for all the wrong reasons, you're not wrong. At least 18 deputies with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office were arrested this year. For the San Antonio Police Department, it was 6. Dylan Collier takes a look back at this year's most notable arrests.
Daniel Pugh, an 11-year veteran and detective with SAPD, was arrested in January on a family violence charge. Pugh was accused of punching a woman in the face while in the front yard. Deputies said the woman's face was covered in blood. Pugh was eventually fired but has appealed his termination. He did beat the criminal charges, which were dismissed several months ago. 2 San Antonio police officers were allegedly caught up in a love triangle this year. Nicolette Muniz is facing an assault-causing bodily injury charge. The 3-year veteran was accused of having an affair with Officer Kenneth Moreno. A police report states that in April, Muniz showed up to Moreno and his girlfriend's home. Muniz allegedly punched the woman in her face and neck. Less than a month later, Moreno was arrested for allegedly threatening to kill his ex-girlfriend. The 13-year veteran of the force was charged with stalking. Muniz and Moreno are on administrative leave. BCSO Deputy Michelle Matthew was arrested in May on a warrant for tampering with a government record. He's accused of writing down that he had checked on inmate Jarnell Kimball when in fact he hadn't. Kimball was found dead in his cell after an apparent medical episode. Matthew was placed on unpaid administrative leave. Corporal Armando Trevino is accused of making a drug deal while in uniform. He was arrested in June on 3 charges, including bribery and possession with intent to deliver.
He's been with the agency about 5 years now, and we understand that a good portion of that has been, part of it has been smuggling drugs in. This is not his first time doing this.
Deputy Floyd Berry remains free on bond after being charged with 3 counts of official oppression. He's accused of forcing women to remove their clothing during improper strip searches following traffic stops. Investigators say they have evidence in at least 6 cases, but believe there could be more victims.
As we end 2019, we have shared over 40 stories over the past year about how you can take better care of your finances right here on the News at 9. But there's still plenty more tips to go. In tonight's Money It's Personal, digital journalist Ivan Herrera shares his top 5 financial tips.
And just like that, 2019 is almost over. Have you been paying attention to my Money It's Personal finance tips every week? If you missed a few, here are my top personal finance tips of the year to give you a head start on improving your finances for 2020. First, know your credit score and request your credit report every year. Lenders use your credit score to determine if you're a good candidate for loans or credit, and it can even be used by rental and insurance companies. Payment history, length of credit history, and number of accounts are just some of the factors used to calculate your credit score. Remember, you're entitled to a free credit report every 12 months by visiting annualcreditreport.com. Next, emergencies can happen anytime, and if you're not prepared, bills may start piling up in your mailbox and cause you lots of headache in the long run. Putting away even small amounts of money can make a significant impact over time. Start putting aside what you can to help cover emergencies and set up guidelines for how you can use your emergency savings fund. While we're on the subject of saving, how about making it easier for yourself? One of the easiest ways to save is by setting it up to happen automatically whenever you get paid. This is a way to make your money grow consistently and without a lot of effort. Whether you're saving for a rainy day, a vacation, or retirement, once you set up automated savings, you'll be able to set aside money without thinking twice. If you're not in a position to save a lot because you're paying down high-interest debt, consider stashing your high-interest credit cards, determining how much money you owe, and try paying down the debt with the highest interest rate first while still making payments on your other accounts. My final tip of the year is to create better personal finance habits, such as only applying for credit when you need it, setting up bank accounts to track your finances, and avoid missing any bill payments. See you in 2020.
We have linked all of our Money It's Personal stories with even more information on our website. You can find them at ksat.com/news@9. And if you have any money questions that you would like us to answer, you can submit those right there at the bottom of that article. You're watching this special edition of Year in Review on KSAT News at 9. We'll be back in just 1 minute. This past year in Texas, 22 people were shot and killed at a Walmart in El Paso. Just a few weeks later, 8 people were gunned down in a shooting spree in Midland and Odessa. In both of those shootings, 4 dozen people were injured. Efforts to stop gun violence have our lawmakers here in the Lone Star State in a tug of war over gun control. Patty Santos takes a look back at the tragedies that rocked us this year in our One Nation Under Fire series.
This summer, San Antonio lawmakers proposed a controversial program that they believe would take guns off the streets. District 2 Councilwoman Jada Andrews Sullivan and District 9 Councilman John Courage suggested the city consider a voluntary citywide gun buyback program. The proposal raised questions about where to find the money to fund the purchases, how to dispose of the weapons bought, and if it would even work. Police Chief William McManus said he didn't support this program because, from his experience, quote, they just don't work. Council is expected to take the issue back up after the holiday break. The San Antonio community began a citywide open dialogue to discuss ways to stop the gun violence following the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. 3 town halls put on by District 8 Councilman Manny Pelaez focused on mental health, the use of social media, and the restrictions the local governments have to adopt regulations dealing with firearms. The goal of the town halls was to open up the conversation on a difficult topic with the hopes of finding common ground and a way to stop mass shootings. Despite a public outcry by some legislators, Governor Greg Abbott never called a special session to address gun violence following the Texas mass shootings. Instead, back in September, he issued 8 executive orders aimed at stopping potential mass shootings. Among those orders was the push to increase staff at all fusion centers to better collect and respond to suspicious activity, reports, and monitor potential online threats. In addition, he created 2 committees to study gun violence and come up with recommendations for his office and the Lieutenant Governor's office.
From a wild fight inside of a Popeyes to a cricket invasion to the morning greeting heard across the country, RJ Marquez takes a look back at some of the most popular local viral videos.
Video of a fight at a San Antonio Popeyes restaurant quickly spread across social media in November. The fight happened at the restaurant on Southwest Military Drive. A bystander told KSAT she saw an employee and customer arguing when the employee threw a serving tray at the customer. The video was seen by more than 250,000 people on Twitter. A hit and run at a Northwest Side bar was caught on camera in May. A woman drove into two people outside the well off UTSA Boulevard. Police said the driver and the women had been arguing. The alleged driver was later arrested. Video of what happened was viewed nearly 3 million times online. Strong winds toppled a scaffold in downtown San Antonio in September. The scaffolding, which was about 10 stories high, damaged a church and several cars below. 3 people were hurt and the cleanup took days. Swarms of crickets invaded San Antonio in late October, causing some to take drastic measures to avoid the creepy crawlers. One video posted on Twitter showed a man grab a handful of crickets and put them in his mouth. That video had nearly 500,000 views in less than a day. Meanwhile, a Bernie Elementary School set their chickens loose to eat the insects. The cricket invasion came after a very dry summer across our area.
Good morning, y'all. Good morning, y'all. Good morning, y'all.
A morning greeting made a San Antonio teen a viral sensation across the country and overseas. Nicholas Quadra and his friends put together a daily compilation video of him saying, "Good morning, y'all," to his class at Reagan High School. The video was shared on social media and seen by millions of people.
2019 was no exception when it comes to things weird and wacky. A lot of these had South Texans doing a double take over the last year and saying, "What?" So we had to take a look back at these. Remember this one?
Both my daughter and I, we saw it, we're like, it's a zebra!
Not one, but 2 zebras running loose in New Braunfels in August. One caught on dash cam charging through a neighborhood. The zebras escaped from a private property and swam across the Guadalupe River. Cell phone video with the caption, "Flying zebra, y'all," showed the animal being airlifted after it was caught and tranquilized. After running for hours through the summer heat, both zebras died. Then there was this gem.
Lick it. Oh, you foul. Put it back. Put it back. Put it back.
A San Antonio teenager on video licking a half-gallon of Bluebell ice cream and putting it back on the shelf of a grocery store. The video went viral in July. It was seen millions of times, and unfortunately, it sparked plenty of copycats. Turns out the tasteless tasting happened at a Walmart in Lufkin, but a police investigation, along with the help of plenty of detectives via social media, revealed the girl was from San Antonio. If Bluebell isn't quite your flavor, how about some barbacoa and Big Red? More than 600 knives, stun guns, and weapons were collected at the Barbacoa and Big Red Festival in May. The San Antonio event was also plagued by complaints of long lines and high heat. But yeah, we were more concerned about the weapons.
This thing just splashed cement all over my brand new car.
In November, drivers caught a truck on camera splashing cars with wet cement as it went. It happened on the far west side near Culebra Road and Rogers Road. Whoops. Another major headache for drivers, this massive sinkhole that opened up along Highway 90. It happened back in April and shut down this stretch of the highway near Hunt Lane for days. A 24-inch sewer main collapsed under the road, spawning that sinkhole. And then this one left a lot of people in a fog. News that Willie Nelson is no longer smoking weed. In November, during a tour stop in San Antonio, the 86-year-old legend told our Paul Venema,
"I have abused my lungs quite a bit in the past, so breathing is a little more difficult these days, and I have to be careful."
Despite some breathing-related health issues, Willie added he does not plan to quit touring. It wasn't a general election year, but 2019 was still a big one for politics. From a heated mayoral race here in San Antonio to some changes made to the Texas state constitution. KSAT News at 9 producer Lexi Salazar takes a look back at the biggest political headlines of the year.
It was a campaign that was at times divisive. The mayoral race started out with 9 candidates, but ended in a runoff between incumbent Ron Nirenberg and then District 6 City Councilman Greg Brockhouse. On the campaign trail, the candidates sparred over things like the city's decision to exclude Chick-fil-A from an airport concession contract and the climate action plan. Nirenberg ended up winning another term in the June runoff. After the campaign, Brockhouse said he was glad it was over.
It's easy to put it on a mailer. It's easy to send those negative things out in the world. But in reality, there's a family behind me that's watching that and seeing that, let's not ever forget that again in San Antonio politics.
While Nuremberg said he learned some lessons on the campaign trail.
I want people to see me more at their doorstep than on TV. And I think that as the years go by, you tend to lose focus on that. But that is certainly something you'll see more of in terms of my presence out in the community.
Another big headline for local city government. For the second time in San Antonio history, women are the majority on city council. 3 newly elected councilwomen, Jada Andrews Sullivan, Adriana Rocha Garcia, and Melissa Cabello Haberda, were sworn in June. On the state level, Texans voted on 10 proposed amendments to the state constitution in November. Among the major changes, Texans approved an amendment making it more difficult for the legislature to enact a state income tax. Voters also approved an amendment giving Texas parks and historic sites the maximum funding authorized from a sales tax on sporting goods. Looking ahead to the big election in 2020, there will be a lot on the ballot. Besides voting for president, there's also a U.S. Senate race in Texas, several U.S. House races, Senate and House races statewide, and several local items on the ballot that Bexar County voters will weigh in on.
We've dedicated most of tonight to revisiting 2019, but in 2020, we won't just be beginning a new year, we'll be kicking off a new decade. So we wanted to take a look back at some of the major stories that defined 2010 through 2018 in our area. In October of 2010, San Antonio police officer Sergio Antion was killed by a drunk driver while helping out at the scene of another car crash on his way home from work. An investigation found that the driver who hit Antion was intoxicated and going 78 miles per hour at the time of the crash. She was sentenced to 45 years in prison. In 2011, a Bexar County Sheriff's Office sergeant was killed in the line of duty in an ambush-style shooting while at a traffic light. Mark Anthony Gonzalez was sentenced to death in the killing of Sergeant Kenneth Van. Just last year, the Sheriff's Office unveiled its first ever permanent substation on the northeast side, named in honor of Van. In November of 2012, Susan Pomerleau made history, becoming the first woman elected sheriff in Bexar County. Pomerleau served until 2016, when she was ousted by Bexar County's current sheriff, Javier Salazar. In 2013, another tragedy for the San Antonio Police Department. Officer Robert DECKARD was killed in a shootout. In November 2013, 3 of the remaining San Antonio 4 were released from prison. The women were convicted in 1998 of sexually assaulting 2 young girls. One of the girls eventually recanted her story. The 4 women were eventually exonerated of the charges and their records were expunged. In 2014, the San Antonio Spurs defeated the Miami Heat to win their 5th NBA championship. San Antonio history made again in 2015 when Ivy Taylor was elected as San Antonio's first African-American mayor. She served until 2017 when now Mayor Ron Nierenberg defeated her in a runoff election. Parts of the Hill Country were ravaged by record flooding in May of 2015. The towns of Wimberley and San Marcos were hit hard by what was called a tidal wave along the Blanco and San Marcos rivers. 13 deaths were reported across that area. After a 19-year career with the San Antonio Spurs, Tim Duncan retired from the NBA in July of 2016. In November 2016, SAPD Detective Benjamin Marconi was gunned down in front of police headquarters. Otis McCain has been charged with capital murder in that case. He's still in jail being held without bond and now awaiting trial. Less than a year later, in June of 2017, San Antonio police officer Miguel Moreno was shot and killed in a shootout. Another officer, Julio Cavazos, was also injured. A San Antonio firefighter also lost his life on the job in 2017. Scott Deem was killed in the Ingram Square fire. Edmund Johnson has been accused of intentionally setting that fire. He's facing arson and murder charges. In November of that same year, tragedy hit a small town church. 26 people were killed and more than 20 others injured after a gunman opened fire during a church service at the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. Since that shooting, the church has built a new worship center. The original church building is now a memorial to the victims. In August 2018, one of the most beloved players in San Antonio history ended his career with the Spurs. Manu Ginobili retired after 16 seasons playing for the Silver and Black. That brings us back to this year. It was a year of ups and downs in the local sports scene. Kawhi Leonard made his highly anticipated return to San Antonio, and Tim Duncan is back on the bench, but we lost yet another pro sports team. RJ Marquez tells us about the year in sports across San Antonio.
The sports year tipped off with the return of Kawhi Leonard. Fans greeted the former Spurs All-Star with a chorus of boos and traitor chants.
Kawhi Leonard.
Leonard forced his way out of San Antonio the year before and was traded to Toronto for DeMar DeRozan. He returned in November as a member of the LA Clippers. The San Antonio Commanders suddenly shut down operations in April without warning and without wrapping up their inaugural season. There were rumblings the league was in financial trouble, but crowds still filled the Alamo Dome for home games. The league later filed for bankruptcy. A pair of Spurs legends made headlines this summer. The Spurs announced in July that Tim Duncan would join Greg Popovich's coaching staff. Duncan retired in 2016 after 19 seasons and 5 championships with the franchise. And Tony Parker officially announced his retirement this summer. The Spurs retired Parker's number 9 jersey in November. TP won 4 titles with the Spurs. Parker's jersey now hangs in the AT&T Center rafters next to Duncan and Manu Ginobili.
In 2019, some stories made us laugh or cry, and they gave us some insight as to who makes up our local community. Who could forget the warm homecoming Bernie students gave to a local police officer who had been recovering at a hospital after she was hit by a suspected drunk driver? Officer Michelle Van Stavern also worked as a school resource officer. Students lined the street with lots of posters and cheers with well wishes for the injured officer, who was heading home to continue her recovery. At Southside ISD, a school principal learned that you don't have to be related by blood to love with your whole heart after meeting her now adopted son. Brenda Gonzalez adopted her first son after she met him while working at Pierce Elementary. And the story doesn't end there. Gonzalez's vice principal's adoption story was the inspiration for her son Braden's adoption. Vice Principal Tanya Matis fell in love with her son Rocky while working closely with him to help him get a better education. Once she adopted him, the sky was the limit for Rocky's future. And cancer was the last thing on anyone's mind when a San Antonio man diagnosed with an aggressive form of the disease got a once-in-a-lifetime gift at a Spurs game. Nia Bender lost her son to cancer and wanted to do something special for Dan Morales, who previously had a large malignant tumor in his stomach. Bender flew from Denver to San Antonio, bought Morales and his wife tickets to a game, and called in a favor from the Spurs organization. They got the full VIP experience with autographs, hugs from the Coyote, and some keepsakes to remember the special night.
Thanks for watching this special year in review edition of KSAT News at 9. I'm Myra Arthur. We hope you'll join us in 2020. We wish you all the best in the new year. Thanks for watching.